There was a time when Aisha thought her life had reached its end, not in years, but in meaning. Everything she had built had crumbled. The people she trusted had left, and the dreams she had woven so carefully had torn apart one by one. She would wake up before dawn, sit by her window, and stare at the sky, whispering into the silence, "Why me? Why this pain?" But there was never an answer. Only the echo of her own voice. She stopped praying for a while, not out of anger, but exhaustion. Her soul felt heavy, as if each breath was weighed down by invisible stones. It was during one of those quiet mornings that she remembered a line her father used to repeat, a line by the great Ibn Arabi. "Your pain is preparing you for something beautiful." She had never understood it before. How could pain be a teacher? How could breaking be a blessing? But that morning, as sunlight broke through the cracks of her curtain, something inside her shifted. Not much, but enough to begin again. The days were slow. Healing doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in whispers, in choosing to rise, even when there's no reason left. Aisha began to take small walks again. She started noticing things she had long forgotten. The fragrance of rain, the warmth of chai between her palms, the laughter of children chasing kites. Every small detail reminded her of a truth she had lost sight of, that even in suffering, life continues to breathe beauty. One evening, she visited the old library near the mosque. She sat in a quiet corner, surrounded by dust and forgotten books. As she pulled out a random one, a folded paper slipped from its pages. It was a letter, old, written in fading ink. It read, "There will come a day when the weight on your heart will make sense. Every wound is a doorway, not a wall. Trust the journey even when you cannot see the destination." The handwriting was elegant, and though she didn't know who wrote it, the words felt like they were written for her. That night, she placed the letter on her bedside table and cried, not out of despair, but release. Weeks turned into months. Her life didn't magically transform, but her perception did. She started helping children in the nearby orphanage with their studies. At first, it was just to fill her empty hours, but over time, it became the only place where her heart felt light again. There was one child in particular who always sat quietly in the back, a boy named Hamza. He rarely spoke, his eyes carrying the same loneliness she once knew. One afternoon, after class, he hesitated at the door, turned to her and said softly, "Teacher, why do people leave?" Aisha froze for a moment. She saw her past reflected in his question. She knelt down, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Sometimes they leave so that we learn who we really are when they're gone." Hamza nodded slowly, and for the first time, he smiled. It was faint, but it was real. That smile became her turning point. Aisha began to understand what Ibn Arabi meant. Pain doesn't come to destroy, it comes to refine. Every heartbreak, every loss, every unanswered prayer, it all chisels the soul, shaping it for what's ahead. In her solitude, she found sincerity. In her silence, she found prayer again. Not the hurried words of asking, but the quiet surrender of trusting. She began waking up before dawn again, but this time not to question, but rather to converse with her Creator, to sit in the stillness and whisper, "Whatever you take away, I trust you will replace with better." And in that moment, she finally felt peace. Months later, while organizing a small community event for the orphanage, she met someone, a volunteer photographer who had come to capture the children's portraits. His name was Zaid. He was gentle, quiet, and carried a calm presence that didn't try to fill silence. It respected it. They began talking, first about the children, then about books, faith, and life. He, too, had known loss. He had lost his wife 3 years earlier and was raising a daughter alone. Their stories were different, but their pain was familiar. And slowly what began as shared understanding grew into something deeper, something sacred. Neither of them rushed it. They both had learned that love isn't about escape, it's about healing together. When he finally proposed, it wasn't with grand words, but a simple question. Will you walk with me through what's left of this life in peace? And she smiled, because her heart finally knew this was what her pain had been preparing her for. The wedding was small, no extravagance, no noise, just simplicity and sincerity. As Aisha stood beside Zayd, watching the children from the orphanage throwing rose petals and laughing, she felt her chest swell with gratitude. Later that night, when the house was quiet, she looked at the stars and whispered, "Ya Allah, you were there all along, weren't you?" And in her heart came a calm reply, not in words, but in peace. Because faith, she realized, was never about understanding everything. It was about trusting when you understood nothing. Years passed. Aisha and Zayd built a small foundation for orphan children and named it An-Noor, the light. Every time she saw a broken soul walk through those doors, she saw her old self, lost, wounded, seeking meaning. And she would tell them the same thing she once read on that letter in the library. Every wound is a doorway, not a wall. She had kept that letter framed in her office. Sometimes she would sit under it, close her eyes, and remember her journey, the nights of doubt, the mornings of tears, and the quiet realization that every pain had been preparation. Her past was no longer a burden, it was her foundation, because without it, she wouldn't have become who she was now, a teacher of light, a woman of faith, a believer in divine timing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Aisha stood by the window once more. The same window where years ago she had cried asking, "Why me?" But tonight her question was different. Why not me? Every hardship had brought her closer to the truth that Allah never wastes pain. Every heartbreak had pushed her toward a higher purpose, and every silence had taught her to listen to the voice of her soul. She finally understood Ibn Arabi's words, not with her mind, but with her life. Your pain is preparing you for something beautiful. Because beauty isn't always comfort. Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes it's faith. And sometimes it's simply being able to say, after all the storms, Alhamdulillah, it all made sense.